We're back today and we're in a 2007 Dodge Ram. This is a 2500 with a Cummins 5.9 liter. Now this is more of a performance-oriented truck. And the reason we chose this truck today is because I want to get my hands dirty. I want to show you guys what it's like to be on the dyno and to do your first tuning session. So we've gone over the fundamentals. We've talked about what the class is about. We've talked about some of the tools in the trade, how to use those tools and what those are about. You know, this is your day one. You're in the truck. This is where the anxiety, the butterflies come. You know, customers are going to bring trucks to you. They're going to have high expectations. It's important you keep your cool. It's important you take the fundamental approach and start from scratch and work your way up until you feel comfortable. So this truck specifically, it's got a built motor. I think the customer previously cracked a piston or had some issue with it. Anyway, so the motor's in good shape. It's got connecting rods, head studs, all those goodies. We have 100% over injectors from Exergy Engineering. So it's a reputable injector. They're capable of flowing twice as much fuel for a given pulse width at high pressure. We also have a upgraded turbocharger, courtesy of Calibrated Power, a Stealth 67. So the stock turbocharger, this turbocharger looks very similar to that turbocharger. However, it has a 67 millimeter compressor wheel and a larger turbine wheel as well. So it's going to be able to supply quite a bit more air to the engine to complement that extra fuel that we're going to see from those 100% over injectors. The truck has a built transmission, has some gauges, has an Edge CTS, but doesn't really have a whole lot of instrumentation on it. And the reason I chose this truck is because it's not a fully instrumented truck. It's very similar to what you're going to see, you know, tuning your first performance truck. You're probably not going to have air-fuel ratio gauge on the truck. You might have an EGT probe, but it might be independent. It might be on the CTS, or it might be a pod-style gauge, right? So you're going to have to, you know, use your intuition a little bit. You're going to have to read the log file and be able to understand certain fuel rates, how happy the turbocharger is at performing where it's at, how hard you're pushing the truck without seeing every single gauge that you'd like to see. And we'll talk about how to do some of that today. Really what it boils down to is starting with the basics and incrementally moving up so that you have a good feel for the platform as you move through the mod process and as you move through the tune process. With all that said, let's get a baseline of the truck. I have it strapped down to the dyno. We're just going to run it with a stock fueling tune file. It has a couple little adjustments made for the 10 millimeter pump that's on it, but otherwise the truck's pretty much ready to run as is. The timing's low, the boost is low, the fueling's low. It's all just basics. Keep in mind these trucks make about 295 horsepower to the tire factory. With the mods that are on the truck, I would expect almost twice that. However, this setup is definitely not optimized, so we haven't changed anything really to take advantage of those other variables that we've added or that the customers added. So we'll see how close we can get to doubling that 295 on this first pass, and then from there we'll start making modifications and testing those. I've started the truck, it's running in park. A couple words of wisdom before we do our first dyno pass. Really important that we use the operating range of the engine for our dyno run. In this test we're going to run 1700 RPM to 3300 RPM. We're going to start under full load, so I'm going to bring the truck to full load before I let it loose and run a 7-second sweep. After that sweep, we'll pull up the graph and take a look at it. All testing is done with the torque converter clutch locked, in third gear, at the same engine coolant temp back to back. So I want to make sure my results are consistent, so as I'm comparing those changes, you know, if I'm seeing subtle changes, I want to make sure that I'm picking those up. So here we go. We're going to start our data log so that we can review the data. There we go, we're in drive. I'm going to flip the torque converter clutch lockup switch. Feel it lock up. I'll bring the truck against the brake, full throttle, and let it go. Okay, the test is over. I'm not going to touch the brake. I'm just going to turn off the torque converter clutch lockup switch. I'm going to end my log by pressing cancel. I'll let the truck come back to idle, let things cool down, turn off the fans, and then we'll review the dyno. We've made our dyno pull, and we have the number. So the number is 527 horsepower. Not too bad, about 980 foot-pounds of torque. We saw the peak right around 2850. So if you look at the shape of the graph, there's some telling things going on here. I just want to draw your attention, one, to the peak. So the peak, as you can see here on the dyno, both peak torque and peak power happen at about the same RPM. That's very unusual for a diesel. Usually peak torque in a performance diesel application is much sooner than peak horsepower. Usually we see peak power around 2,900, 3,000 RPM, maybe even a little higher, and peak torque would be down near the start of the pull around 17 or 1,800 RPM. So we want to check the tune out and check the log file out for that stuff especially. At the start of the pull, power was down quite a bit. And then we had a steep slope right around 2400 RPM, steep slope from there up to 2850, and then another steep slope after that peak. And that is interesting. We would expect power to carry if it was based on hard part limitations or efficiencies in the engine. I'd expect power to carry out a little further than that. However, the fact that power dips off very, very quickly at the end of the pass is kind of telling, and that's probably an electronic limiter. We'll look into that shortly here. So let's jump from the dyno to the log file. This is where you're really going to start to learn. Let me show you where I start on a log file. So as I'm reviewing a performance dyno pull, the first thing I'm going to look at is throttle position. Throttle position can be seen here as the blue line. We can see this blue line hangs out up at 100%, and then right about here where the orange line starts to make a ramp up, that's when I let the truck go and it runs up the ramp of the dyno pull. So as the orange line is running upward, that's RPM gaining, throttle position staying the same. Pink line, mile an hour, and the green line, gear. We're always in third gear. So I'm going to go down to the second area here, and I'm going to look at this next orange line. This next orange line is one of the most important lines in the graph, and that is the fueling number. So that's the fueling call, 127.5 MM3. And that MM3 is important because most of the lookups in the tune are based off of MM3, cubic millimeters, and that's the quantity of fuel that gets injected per stroke per cylinder. So per power stroke per cylinder, that's the quantity of fuel. Very minute, very small quantity of fuel, but it needs to be measured well. And once I see that fuel quantity going up towards the peak, I can tell the truck is underpowered, it's commanding the fuel that it wants. Okay, so we're up near 130, 127 MM3. I'm going to go to the start of my run, which is where the RPM starts to slant up, and I can just follow my fueling number from there, 127, and I can make a mental note up to 145.5 MM3. And then shortly after that, I'll draw your attention back to this orange line, and this orange line quickly tapers off. And we can see that similarly in the dyno graph as the power quickly tapers off after peak. The next line here that I have up is the pink line. The pink line is wastegate duty cycle. This truck is going to be trying to maintain boost control using a pulse width modulated wastegate. On the 2004.5 to 2007 Rams, there's an electronic control on the wastegate. It's pretty archaic design, but it works. And anytime you see that the wastegate control is moving, it's the pulse width modulated wastegate trying to control boost pressure. So under full load, I can see the pink number here, and that pink number shows 47% wastegate duty cycle. That duty cycle hangs out for a little while, and then as the truck really comes into power and heads up towards the peak power number, you can see that wastegate duty cycle drop off to 0%. So 0 would be full active, meaning the truck wants the wastegate to see the full wastegate signal and get rid of the boost. Open the wastegate. Too much boost. How do we know? Well, we're looking at the green line, and this green trace is the boost pressure. So you can see at light load, it's 2 psi. Under heavy load right before the run, it's 26 psi. And then as we ascend the run, we see a peak of 45 psi at 3,000 RPM. We'll take note of that because we'll certainly be adjusting boost pressure later as we attempt to make more power on this truck. Next, I'm going to draw your attention to the orange line. That's main injection timing. That main injection timing number is fairly low. So at the start of the run, we're at -7 degrees. Typically, we see positive timing numbers in performance applications. A lot of times on the factory trucks, you'll see negative timing numbers to mitigate noise and vibration and harshness, and also to control NOx emissions. So, we'll want to take a look at timing. That's one of the things we're going to affect as we move through the tuning process on this truck. At the start of the run, -6, -7. As we go up the run, 8 degrees peak timing, 9 degrees, 8 degrees, and then back down as we go down the back side of the run. Other things I have in this cell: engine coolant temperature, inlet air temperature, pilot injection quantity. Nothing really major. The engine coolant temp I usually just have up just to make sure that I'm consistent run to run. Same with the inlet air temp. So if I have widely different power numbers run to run, I can go back and compare those runs and say, okay, was the coolant temp 135 at the start compared to 180 at the start of the other one, or the inlet air temp, maybe the truck was really sitting heat soaked for a while before it got a chance to run. As I go down here to the bottom block is all about fuel control for me. So I want to look at the duty cycle on the regulator of the pump. I want to see, is the pump running at capacity? Is the fuel pressure actual chasing the fuel pressure desired? So that's these green and red lines. These should be right on top of each other or very near each other. The pink line is fuel pressure desired, and the green line is fuel pressure actual. You can see a little hiccup there. That's nothing to be concerned about. And then a peak fuel pressure of 23,208 psi, and we're getting 23,293. Usually anytime we see fuel pressure within 1,000 psi of call, everything's okay. The milliamps, that's just to show me how hard the pump is working, same with the duty cycle. So we have a pretty good idea of what's going on based on the log file here. We've got a nice review. It's really nice to ground yourself by running a low power test first. You know, this truck is capable of making 800 plus rear wheel horsepower. We've done it in the past. But to run it at 500 horsepower in a very stockish fueling setup and just see how the systems are working and see how happy the truck is, see how happy the pump is, see how the fuel pressure actual is keeping up with fuel pressure desired, see what the boost pressure numbers are, and see the shape of the fueling curve as it compares to the dyno chart. That tells me a lot about the health of the truck, if it's ready to go on and make more power. Okay, so I'm ready to make more power. Let's go in the tune. Let's look around a little bit. There's certainly more to the tune than I can cover in this short demo, but I just want to draw your attention to some basic tables that are in the tune file that are designed to help you make power. This truck is equipped with a 5-position switchable tune. It has 5 subsets of tables here. I'm just going to be working in program 1. So usually when I'm teaching these classes, it's guys who have started out with gas tuning or have a history in tuning gas engines, and you know, they want to jump to timing, they want to jump to air-fuel ratio to make changes, to make adjustments. So, you know, I'm not opposed to that. We can make some small changes and see what they, you know, see how the truck comes up. One of the first and easiest changes we can look at is the timing table. The timing table will show us a few things. Most of the tables in this tune are laid out similar to this timing table. I'll take a second and show you how this table is laid out and what it means. On the top of the table, you'll see the MM3 numbers. Most of the timing numbers and fuel pressure numbers are based off of MM3. And MM3 is simply fuel rate, like I stated before. 0 would be in deceleration fuel cutoff, where the truck is off. 10 would be close to idle. And 140 plus would be full fuel, or the truck is trying to make as much torque as it possibly can and be injecting as much fuel as it possibly could. On the left side, we see RPM. As RPM increases, you can see the timing numbers tend to increase as well. This timing curve probably looks a lot different than anything you're used to if you're coming from the gas world. It's not uncommon to see negative timing numbers in the idle region. It's also not uncommon to see negative timing numbers in the cruise region. The bottom right-hand corner of the graph is what I'd call the power region. So higher RPM and higher fuel rates. And that's the area that we're going to be paying close attention to in this lesson. Again, this is a very basic demo, but let me just show you some of the tools that are available at your disposal. So we saw in the log file that we were making 8 to 9 degrees of timing at peak power at 2,850 RPM, close to 3,000 RPM in that range. And you can see that similarly in the tune file here. So we were at 140 MM3 and we were at 2,900 RPM. There we go, 9 degrees of timing, easy enough. A lot of beginners in the performance tuning on the diesel side like to use a timing calculator. It helps you kind of do a sanity check on, are my numbers reasonable? So let's do a quick adjustment to the timing table, and then we'll flash those changes in and see what those changes make as far as power on the dyno. So EFI Live allows you to use a timing calculator on the 06 Dodge. I click the timing calculator here to open that up. What that timing calculator is to show you what percentage of injection happens before top dead center. Commonly 50% before, 50% after if you're in boost is a very, very basic rule of thumb. I like to err on the lower side of that, especially if you're out of boost. You'll want to be on the much lower side of that. We can see at peak power here, we're at 26% of injection happens before top dead center. With the larger injectors in these trucks, in this truck especially, we're 100% over injectors. Extra timing should help us out here. So because I have this calculator, I have the option to simply select kind of the test window I'm working in, which is high fuel. I think we started at 127 MM3, so I'll click on over here at 1700 RPM. I'll kind of select this whole area, and then I can select what percentage of time of injection I want to happen before top dead center. 35 is a pretty safe number, and that's, when I say safe, I mean usually for higher RPM. Now this is not taking into consideration any noise constraints or NOx emissions or anything like that. This is strictly a power and a competition scenario. And then I'm going to blend this in. So EFI Live has some nice tools, HP Tuners does. A lot of the big name softwares out there have some really nice tools as far as blending go. So easy way to blend. To highlight those cells, I can come up here and fill cells with linear data, and that'll just slope that change in. And then similarly, I can slope that change in a linear fashion. When I think I'm close, I can click Apply, and I can close the calculator, and I can look at my new timing graph. If I right-click on the map, I can drag it around and kind of show you what I made, nice and pretty. Easy thing to do here. I think it's a little bit steep. I'm going to make a few adjustments. So there's some smoothing tools. This is stuff that you can get into as you refine your tune a little bit. This isn't stuff I would do first day on the dyno, but just to show you kind of what's out there a little bit. And as a matter of habit of operation, I'll smooth this in a little bit. So here's the smoother. I click it and you can see the cells smooth in and the data comes in a little bit cleaner. So now that I have that data in there and smooth, I'm going to make sure that that timing number goes into the other timing tables. So there's 4 base timing tables. You might not be 100% sure which your truck is running in. Shotgun approach would say to change them all unless you narrow down which one you're in. So 110 mm3 and 1550 RPM. And I'll press Control V, paste. There's my timing adjustment. And you can see there that table was different. Okay, I'm going to back that change out. So this air density adjust number 2, the timing was at 11.5 degrees. So we know we weren't running in air density adjust 2. And I'll just blend that table in a little bit. 11.5 degrees. Similar, we weren't running in timing adjust 3. I'm going to blend that in a little bit to show you a couple different tools at your disposal. Again, this is kind of a quick and dirty method, but it will certainly add some timing. So we've added timing. Instead of 9 degrees, we're going to go to about 12.6 degrees at full throttle, and we're going to see more timing in earlier in the rev range as well. So as I go up on the left-hand column, I go from 3,000 RPM up back to the start of our test, 1550, 1700 RPM. So I'm going to save this tune, I'm going to reflash it, and then we're going to run the truck on the dyno, verifying the log that we got the extra timing and see what kind of power gains we get. So we've run that second test. We're going to find out whether or not that extra timing made more power, made more torque, or what impact it had on the drivability or the power output of the truck. Not the drivability yet. We're on the dyno still. So before we do that, I just want to look at the log file and verify, did we go from that 8-9 degrees of timing up to the 12-13 degrees of timing? Let's see in the log file that actually happened. So here's the old log, just to refresh our memory again. 8 degrees of timing at 29:16, right around there. Okay. I'm going to open the new log. I like to rename these so they make sense. So I'm going to head to that same position in the log. I'm going to look and see, as RPM climbs towards that 2900, do we have 8 degrees or 9 degrees? So again, I draw my attention to the orange line. I chase it up, 2900, 26, and then I look down to the timing number, and the timing number is at 12 degrees. So we did in fact gain 4 degrees of timing at peak. We also gained some timing across the entire RPM range. So let's divert our attention from the log file and let's look over and see how did that impact the dyno number. The first thing that grabs my attention in the dyno run is that the runs take off at the same power level. They're within a few horsepower of each other, so it's a pretty consistent test. The other thing I notice is that right after they take off, the tune with more timing pulls ahead. 455 horsepower difference at about 2100 RPM, 414. So that's a 40 horsepower difference early in the rev range. That's significant, or 40 foot-pounds. 331 power to 299. It's about 30 horsepower difference. And you can see as the run changes, as we climb up the rev range there, that gap maintains a pretty consistent trail. However, those two lines converge, and they converge right around 2650 RPM. And at that convergence point, the interesting thing is that the horsepower number of the lower timing tune surpasses that of the higher timing tune, which tells me that the timing that we added after 2650 RPM was to the detriment of the output of the engine. So we in fact made less power by adding timing up there. Adding timing doesn't always gain power. Guys who've been in the tuning business know that. It's important to show that the temptation in the performance diesel market is that more timing is going to make you more power. You don't know that unless you test it. And this dyno graph is a perfect indicator of that. As we continue through, we can see that the peak on the lower timing tune is actually higher, 527 compared to 517. So we lost 10 horsepower at peak. Torque-wise, though, the lower timing tune also made more torque, more peak torque. But as I pull over to the average, which is going to be the driver experience, so when you're running the truck and you're going up to the shift point, falling back down and pulling through the rev range again, the average of the dyno pull is going to tell a much better story, much more accurate story of the driver experience than the peak numbers. The tune with more timing made significantly more average power, 408 compared to 385. So that's 23 more average horsepower through the pull. That's going to show up on a time slip. That's going to show up 0 to 60. That's going to show up on the street. The thing to take away from this is that we need to address those timing numbers in the window where we lost power compared to the stock timing tune and back those timing numbers back a little bit. This is an iterative process. This is stuff that you learn on the dyno by looking at where those numbers diverge between, where you see those gains and where you see the losses, and then mitigating those where at the loss point to get the best out of the truck. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about timing. However, the big thing that I see in these dyno graphs is that we still have those sharp points. So the truck is down on torque until it comes up to 2850, makes a sharp peak, and then quickly we lose horsepower. Adding timing didn't really change that very much. We saw more torque down low, a slight rounding of the peak, but also a quick dive right after the truck made peak torque and peak power. So what gives? Well, I'm going to draw your attention to the tune file again and show you. As the manufacturers build these tune files, they build what's called a lug curve. And this lug curve defines the output of the engine across the RPM range. This lug curve is designed to do a bunch of things. One is to control the output of the engine at different RPM to make sure that we're not getting excessive torque for a whole bunch of reasons, so we don't break parts, overheat, run into emissions issues, all that stuff. So we want to find the lug curve of the engine and see, does that lug curve kind of translate into the shape of this dyno graph? And if so, that'll tell us that the shape of the dyno graph is electronically limited. Now, here's a pro tip. We looked at the log file and we saw that peak fuel was 145, and that only happened at 2850 RPM. With that peak fuel at 2850, and then quickly the peak fuel tapered down into the 120s and below on the right-hand side towards the higher RPM. But as that peak fuel pulls off, you know, okay, for some reason the engine is not commanding full fuel rate. Let's take a look here at a lug curve and I'll show you what I mean. EFI Live's labeled these tables very helpfully. This 2006 platform is a really pretty easy platform to tune. So here's the fuel limiter table selection 2. This is just one of the limiters. In most OEM tuning platforms, you're going to find a lot of limiter tables. And that's because there's a lot of different reasons why you'd want to limit the output of the engine. Some of the aftermarket tuning platforms, you're only going to find 1 or 2 limiters. However, when you're on the OEM stuff, prepare to find 10 or 12 limiting tables. Now this is interesting. Our run starts at 1700 RPM. Now we can see on the graph here, these numbers are different columns represent different altitudes or different reasons for limiting. I'm going to assume that the truck is in the higher column, and I'm going to assume that because the evidence that I have in the log file shows that we're very nearly 145 mm3 at peak fueling. And the 0 column is the closest one to that number. Remember, on an OEM tune, things aren't always exact. You might be 1 or 2 or 5 mm3 off. It's not uncommon. Some of that's accounted for in pilot and post injection. So let's look at column 0 and let's look at our dyno graph. So this would define our power output or our torque output. We can see at 1700 we have a slow ramp up to peak at 2850, 2900, and then a quick fall off after that. That's pretty telling. That's very similar to the shape of our dyno graph. In fact, I would say the two are just about identical twins. So if I want to get full fueling, I want to get full torque, I want to use all the fuel that I have available to me, what I need to do is tell the engine that it's okay to do that. I'm going to tell it that by adjusting this curve. So I'm going to look at the window where we're operating the truck. We want peak torque. And that's from 1700 RPM up to essentially the red line. And I'm going to type in that big fueling number, 145. And you can see I kind of plateaued that whole curve. Now, as you're tuning for street manners, or you want to put a rev limiter in, or you might have other aspirations, other reasons to limit, this would be where you would do that. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to make it obvious. I'm going to use my mouse pointer now, just kind of slope that curve in a little bit, make it look pretty. So we know now that we have that torque limiter out of the way. And just because I'm not 100% sure that I'm not in column 1, 2, 3, or 4, I'm going to go ahead and copy this limiter into those tables as well. I'm just clicking at the top and pressing Control V to paste. There, now you can see all the torque limiters are the same. One of the other tables that I want to draw you to, just as an example of how the factory has many torque limiting tables, many things that can pull fuel away, I'll draw you to the factory pedal position table. Now this table across the top shows throttle position versus RPM. So RPM is on the side. As engine speed increases, this is the call for how much MM3 goes into each stroke, or each power stroke. So at 25% pedal position, we're looking at 35 mm3, 50% we're looking at 70 mm3, and at 100% throttle position, we're looking at 145 mm3, so full fuel. Well, I want to look right here at 3000 RPM. This is kind of interesting because instead of having 145 mm3, we have 131. And then at 3220, we have 100 mm3. So we have a quick plateau, drop off that plateau as RPM crests past 3000. Very similar to what we're seeing in our dyno graphs. So in order to test the theory that this table is also contributing to the top end fall off of power, I'm going to take that 145 row and I'm going to paste it into the rows below it. And I'm not going to paste it into 4000 row because I don't really want to run the engine up that high, but I'll paste it into 3600 row just so we can see a clear picture from 1700 to 3300 of what happens if we have full fuel across that operating range. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this file, flash it, and we'll do another dyno run.